Hello everyone, welcome to N.O.S. Today we shall be discussing about one of the most important human body system known as the respiratory system. Every few seconds, human body respires in order to exchange the oxygen and carbon dioxide within their lung cavity so that their cells and tissues get enough concentration of oxygen in order to conduct their metabolic functions. So here we can see that the woman here is breathing and her air is in the atmospheric pressure, whereas this is her airway tract and these are her two lungs. So every human comprises of these structures in order to maintain their respiratory system. So in detail, we can see that there are numerous anatomical structures involved in the respiratory system, and here we can divide them into two sections such as upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. Within the upper respiratory tract, there are usually four structures called as nose, nasal cavity, sinuses, and pharynx. So going into the further detail, we can see that the nostrils, or also called as the nose, is one of the entrance for air which is filtered by coarse hairs, which means that the nostrils and the hairs within the nostrils helps to filter the air that we inspire during the respiratory process. It has two portions known as the external and internal, which are supported by bones and cartilages that we can see in this structure, and has a large cavity in the skull which connects external and internal nose. So in this way, the nostrils or the nose helps to inhale the air from the atmosphere into the airway tract. The second anatomical structure that is involved in this process is nasal cavity. These cavities are usually divided by a structure known as the concha, which is lined with the mucous membranes, so that the incoming air within the air cavity is always warm as well as filtered. They help to trap the air particles, any particles within the air that they have been inhaling through their ciliary actions in order to transport the filtered air that has been humidified into the pharynx. Whereas sometimes when we inhale through the mouth, then they can get swallowed into the stomach along with the air particles. Similarly, the next structure is that of sinuses. There are four types of sinuses that are present in a human body. These are maxillary, frontal, ethmoid, and sphenoid. This can also be seen in the figure given below. Here, this structure is known as the ethmoid sinus, whereas these are the nasal cavity. Here is the maxillary sinus, and these are lined with the mucous membrane, whereas the sphenoid sinus is nearby our auricle or ear canal that can be visualized from this picture. These sinuses are actually air-filled spaces which open into the nasal cavity so that the skull weight can be reduced as well as provide a quality to the voice, that is of resonance. In this way, the nostrils, nasal cavity, and sinuses are all interlinked with one another, whereas pharynx, which is also called as the throat, is a funnel-shaped structure. Here in the picture we can see that this is the pharynx. This is a funnel-shaped structure which lies posterior to nasal cavity, posterior to nasal cavity, posterior to oral cavity. This is the oral cavity, and posterior to the larynx. This is larynx and this is the pharynx. So posterior to pharynx. So if we are ever asked about the anatomical position of pharynx, then it lies posterior to nasal cavity, posterior to oral cavity, and posterior to the larynx. It is a common passage of food and air. Here we can see that. In this picture, this is the pharynx, and from here begins the larynx, and here is the esophagus. So this area as a whole is pharynx, and in this area both airway and the food are connected with one another in this area, particular area. So this is known as the common passes of food and air. Hence, as per the label in the diagram, we can see that pharynx can also be divided into three parts. These are nasopharynx, oropharynx, and hypopharynx. In this way, nasopharynx is actually the uppermost part of the pharynx. Oropharynx lies between the nasopharynx and the hypopharynx, whereas hypopharynx lies below the oropharynx, nearby the larynx. So these were the structures which were present in the upper respiratory tract, which usually helps to humidify and filter the air that enters further into the lower respiratory tract. Now further, here we can see that inside the lower respiratory tract, there are actually four structures. These are larynx, trachea, bronchial tree, and lungs. So for the larynx is such a structure which is positioned superior to trachea and inferior to pharynx. Here we can see that larynx has been labeled in this area, whereas pharynx is this area. So larynx lies inferior to pharynx but superior to trachea. Okay, so in between the larynx, in between the trachea and pharynx, there lies the larynx. It is also known as the voice box of the human body. The sound that I am making is possible because of the voice box or because of the voice articulating device that is present inside my larynx. They also help to prevent from the entrance of different particles inside the respiratory tract. So within the larynx as well, we can see that there are different structures. One of them is epiglottis. Epiglottis is actually a leaf-shaped cartilage. It acts as a flap in order to prevent the food from entering trachea. For instance, in this picture we can see that this is the epiglottis. It is actually a leaf-shaped and it is a cartilage. It's not a bone. It's a type of bone, but not exactly the long bone or the hard bone that is present in our other parts of the body. So epiglottis acts as a flap. Flap in the sense that we can see that our airway and our food way, both of them are interconnected with one another. This is larynx, and from here goes the food, from here goes the airway. So epiglottis acts as a barrier in order to prevent the food from entering inside the airway, because once the food enters inside the airway, then we can develop different complications, one of them being aspiration pneumonia. So epiglottis is this kind of structure, this kind of leaf-shaped flap kind of the structure which helps to prevent from occurrence of such complications of aspiration. Next is vocal cords. Recently I said that because of the vocal cords I am able to voice my thoughts, and right now I am speaking and you are hearing it because of these vocal cords. So they are made up of muscle folds, which are 2 in number, with connective tissues and are covered with mucous membranes. So as a whole we can see that this is the vocal cord, but it is divided into two, that is false vocal cords and true vocal cords. False vocal cords lie in the upper part, whereas true vocal cords lie in the lower part. It has been labeled in the picture, and with the help of these vocal cords, whenever the tension in the vocal cords increases, then the pitch of our sound also increases. Whereas whenever the air force, the way we expire or the way we expel the air from our lungs, that helps to increase the loudness of our voice. So whenever you think about somebody is speaking in loud voice, then think that much more air force is being expelled from their vocal cord. And now for the normal breathing process, the vocal cords and glottis relax. Recently we studied epiglottis is a leaf-shaped cartilage. Leaf-shaped cartilage, this is the epiglottis structure, and this is our voice box. So whenever both of these structures relax, then the normal breathing is performed. Whereas for the swallowing to occur, the vocal cord, this structure as well as this structure both needs to be closed off so that the food doesn't enter inside our respiratory system but into the digestive system. So in this way, further we can see in this picture as well, here the air is flowing, the tracheal airflow is occurring, and here are the two voice box, and here is the voice box structure. And in this way, whenever they open and close, the sound is produced and we are able to speak properly. Thus, this is the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract that is present in the respiratory system. The nose, nasal cavity, sinuses and pharynx are the four structures that are present in the upper respiratory tract, whereas in the lower respiratory tract we have discussed about larynx, and further we'll discuss about trachea. After the larynx, in the lower respiratory tract, we can see that we have got trachea. This is the structure of trachea. We can see that it is kind of like a tree, an inverted tree. Our lungs is kind of like an inverted tree. The larynx is kind of like the base of the tree, whereas the trachea is like a trunk. So it is anterior to esophagus, meaning that this is the trachea, and at the back, posteriorly, on the posterior surface, we can find that there is an esophagus. So esophagus and trachea lie anterior to posterior. Because of this, the chance of aspiration and the complications related to aspiration is very, very high among the elderly or among the people who are critically ill, because the food pipe and the airway both are very close to one another, and whenever the respiratory system or our digestive tract are not compatible with one another or are not regulated or maintained as they need to be in a human being, then the person can get aspiration syndrome, because of which they will aspire the food they have taken, and whenever it enters inside the lungs, then they get inflamed and other different kind of the complications, even pneumonia, which is very common in the hospital setting. So the location of the trachea is anterior to esophagus, which extends from 6th cricoid ring to the right and left bronchi, carina, T5, we have said. So carina is actually one of the ribs, anterior ribs, from which the bronchi or the trachea bifurcates into the different bronchioles and enter inside the lungs. So this is the carina, and carina is one of the most important anatomical structure in order to identify the bronchi and main bronchus and bronchioles. So structure is that trachea is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. This is important to better understand and acknowledge it, because these ciliary muscles are the one which helps to trap any form of air particles within the airway tract and prevent them from entering inside the lungs, even the organisms as well, so that the infection can be reduced or prevented from occurring. So these are kind of like a barriers that are present within our respiratory tract in order to prevent from occurrence of any health complications related to respiratory system. So these are lined further barriers could be goblet cells, and these are supported by 20 cartilaginous ring horseshoe shaped cartilages. We can see that these are circular structures present in the trachea, and these are the cartilaginous structures, and these are 20 in number, horseshoe shaped, but these are incomplete. Why they are incomplete? Because whenever there is a bony structure present around the surface, then they get hard and inflexible. But since we have esophagus on the posterior surface of the trachea, we need to acknowledge that sometimes the esophagus needs a movement-like motion for the food to pass into the stomach, from our mouth to our stomach, so that the trachea, when they get when they are incomplete, then anteriorly they will support the structure, but posteriorly they will help the esophagus to expand and contract or relax as per the desire. So for the space needed for the esophagus, these rings are incomplete. Now carina, I have already told, they are located at last tracheal cartilage at the internal aspect res. And there is a point, this is actually a point where trachea branches into the bronchi or the bronchioles. And since they have very sensitive mucosa, because of this, even the slight irritation to it could cause the cough reflex. Okay, so this was about the trachea, and now we can go towards the bronchi. Bronchi are the structures which are actually present in this picture. These are the branches of the trachea. Here we can see that trachea has branched into two structures, and this is known as the bronchi, and this complete structure is bronchi, which has been further divided or further ascended into the different bronchioles, smaller bronchioles. So we can see that right and left we have got two different bronchi. This is right and this is left. So the right side, usually they bifurcate into the three parts, 1, 2 and 3, whereas in case of the left we have got only two, 1 and then 2. Yeah, so in this way we can say that right is usually short. This distance is short. Here we can see that it is very short. This is very short, whereas left side is very long. Length is long, as well as left are usually longer but narrower than right. Right is more vertical, more wide. This is very wide, and also short. Because of this, there is high risk of aspiration because it is very short, and immediately if you aspire and food particles enter inside your airway tract, then they have higher chance to enter the right lung because they are very short, wide and vertical. But in the left side of the bronchi, left side of the lungs, we can see that the bronchi is divided into only two branches. They are very long, so the food particles to enter inside them it takes a certain period of time that is longer than the right side ones, and they are also narrow, so they could get stuck here rather than enter directly inside the lungs. So now each bronchi divide into secondary lobar bronchi. We need to know that first of all we have got bronchus. Bronchus means these are the main bronchi. This is what the trachea divide into, that is bronchus. Then we have got, what we have got is, first of all we have got the bronchus. Now the bronchus is divided, or bronchi is divided into secondary, that is lobar bronchi. We need to know these names which they have been divided into. And finally now the bronchi again divides into segmental bronchi. So we have got bronchus or bronchi, which gets divided into lobar bronchi, means it goes into the lobes of the lungs, so it is now lobar bronchi. Now it goes into the segment of the lungs, so that's why now it is segmental bronchi. This segmental bronchi again divides into terminal bronchioles, and finally into respiratory bronchiole. So first of all we have got the bronchus, which divides into lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi divides into segmental bronchi. This segmental bronchi divides into terminal bronchiole, and finally they divide into respiratory bronchiole. And this respiratory bronchiole is what enters inside the alveoli. So which structure of bronchi actually enters inside the alveoli or is actually connected to the alveoli directly is respiratory bronchiole. So these small ones are the respiratory bronchiole as written here. Okay, so this is how you know that which structure is affected in case a client has lungs problems in them. So we need to know that what kind of lining is present inside these structures. For instance, here we have got that all of the bronchi is usually lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Always understand that ciliated is present there so that they will help to trap any kind of the particles that are present in the air that have been inspired by that person, or also because they help to pass the mucus. Yeah. And then except terminal bronchus, which is lined by non-ciliated, means they do not have the ciliary muscles in them now, and the columnar epithelium. Respiratory bronchioles is lined by the cuboidal cells, and alveoli is lined by the squamous cells. In this way, different kind of linings are present in the different parts of the bronchi. Because of this, we need to know that which part of the bronchi is being affected and whether they are ciliated or not, what kind of secretions do they provide, so that we will know that what kind of complications could be predetermined in a client or a patient. Now for the alveoli, we know that alveoli is this kind of like air sacs that are present at the end of the bronchial tree, and consist of air exchange chambers. This is an individual air exchange chambers, and this forms into clusters into a large alveolar sac. Within an alveolar sac, there are actually 17 alveoli, and an average adult consists of about 300 million alveoli. So you can just imagine that how many alveoli is required for a human being to breathe or respire in a day-to-day basis. Now, each alveoli is in close contact with the pulmonary capillary network. Here we can see in the picture or the diagram that there are the red and the blue ones here covering the alveoli. This is the blue veins and this is the red artery. Artery is bringing the oxygenated blood into the alveoli, whereas taking the oxygenated blood from the alveoli, whereas the blue veins are bringing the deoxygenated blood into the alveoli for the oxygenation process. So we can see here that alveoli is very closely connected in this figure. Especially we can see that how closely connected they are to the capillary endothelium, and it is only separated from the alveolar epithelium and capillary endothelium by a basement membrane. So if this is an alveolar membrane and this is a capillary endothelium, then there is a very fine membrane in between them. This is known as the basement membrane, and through this membrane is what the gaseous exchange occurs. Means if we have got an alveoli and a capillary endothelium, means we have got here the oxygen is going inside and the carbon dioxide is going outside. So for this process to occur, or the gaseous exchange to occur, the basement membrane is present in between them. Whereas for the fluid and solid, means for any kind of solute, which can be either sodium, potassium, anything, or fluid such as water, to exchange between these two membranes, then we need here the interstitial space. The interstitial space in between them acts as a common ground for both of them. And one of the most important factor that is present within this structure is that within the structure of alveoli is that they have got a specific kind of the cells known as the pneumocytes, which is very important to know because they produce surfactant. Surfactant is one of the most essential factor to prevent from the collapse of the alveoli. They are usually developed during the embryonic stage when they are inside the womb, at the time of the pregnancy stage of their mothers, and they are what helps to prevent from these two alveoli being connected with one another or being in close contact with one another. So in order to prevent that from occurring, a fluid-like structure is present known as a surfactant. So as a whole total, here in the picture we can see that for the summary, every human being comprises of the respiratory tract, which can be divided into upper and then lower respiratory tracts. So here we can see that we have got upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. So upper respiratory tract means that we have got the nasal cavity, nostril, oral cavity, and also the pharynx. So these are the upper respiratory tract, which only kind of like acts as the conducting route through which the air passes. So whenever we inhale, the air comes inside the nostril into the nasal cavity, and from the nasal cavity it goes into the pharynx, and pharynx lies posterior to the nasal cavity, posterior to the oral cavity, as well as posterior to the larynx. So this is the structure of pharynx, which is a funnel shaped structure and is a common passageway for both the airway as well as the foodway. So here we can see now that the lower respiratory tract consists of actually larynx, right, bronchi and the lungs. Now larynx actually lies below the pharynx. Below the pharynx lies the larynx, and on the posterior aspect of the larynx, here we can see is the esophagus. This is the esophagus, and it goes inside like this, and it goes down into the stomach. So for the larynx is this structure, which is actually the voice box of the body, and it comprises of vocal cords, which helps to produce or maintain the sound and the pitch of our voice. Further down we can see that we have got trachea. This is the structure of trachea, and trachea is a cylindrical shaped structure which acts as lies below the larynx and above the bronchi, and at the spot of the carina, which is also known as the site or the location of bifurcation of the trachea into right and then left primary bronchus. The structure of trachea is lined with supported with the cartilaginous structures, which are only half shaped, and horseshoe shaped. They are incomplete in order to provide shape for the posteriorly lining esophagus. And finally we can see that after the trachea has become bifurcated into the right and then left primary bronchus, right is actually kind of like short and vertical, more short, vertical, and prone to being aspiration, whereas left is more longer, narrower, and divides only into two bronchi. So in this way the bronchioles further separates and bifurcates and finally forms the bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, which are connected with the alveolar duct. And alveolar sac consists of small alveoli, about more than 20 in each alveolar sac, and these are very finely and minutely connected to extensive network of capillaries, which helps in the gaseous exchange process within the lungs. And finally in this way the complete process of the respiratory system occurs within this respiratory tract. So I hope that this was really beneficial for you all, and if you have any questions, please comment down on the comment section below so that I can further answer you. Thank you.